Chapter 18 from the official NASA Procedures for Contact with Intelligent Extraterrestrial Life Manual. Official greetings. In the hopeful event that the secondary contact proves to be friendly rather than hostile, the primary objective of the encounter ought to be to welcome the IEL to Earth and begin to foster peaceful relations between our species. Therefore, the first message will most likely be to extend warm greetings to the IEL, although what form this message is delivered in will be left up to DEXA's linguistics team. Ideally, the President and other world leaders, including the leader whose country contact has occurred in, assuming they are not despotic, will be among the first members of humanity to communicate with the IEL, but given travel times, it may not be feasible to wait for them. Therefore, the senior U.S. government representative on location will most likely be tasked with extending the initial message of greetings, and they, as well as all other representatives of the USA present, should do all they can to make the IEL feel welcome and comfortable on our planet. Imminent suffocation, Lunar Day 252, quite possibly the last minutes of my life.
"Stop it!"
Violet screamed at whoever had attacked me. Her voice was high-pitched and terrified. She understood what was going on, but she couldn't do anything to help me. She was still stuck on her back.
"Leave my brother alone!"
On the radio channel, along with her screams, I could hear something else. The sounds of my attacker breathing heavily. They'd been listening in on the same channel that we'd been using. Either the exertion of attacking me was forcing them to breathe louder than before, or I stupidly hadn't realized that they were eavesdropping until it was too late. "Violet!" I yelled. "It pulled my oxygen hose! You need to—" I actually said, "put it back," but Violet didn't hear that part. And neither did anyone else, because my radio went dead as my attacker killed that too. And then they shoved me down on top of Violet. My helmet slammed into the ground. Luckily, there were no moon rocks to break the faceplate, but I ended up face down in a pile of moon dust, which clung to the glass and practically blinded me. "Warning," the voice in my suit announced. "You have approximately 2 minutes and 30 seconds to repair your oxygen hose or return to base." A graphic showing my rapidly depleting oxygen supply appeared on the heads-up display inside my helmet. So basically, I was facing the worst-case scenario. 2 minutes and 30 seconds was very little time to get back to the base, enter the airlock, repressure, and repressurize it, especially when someone else was doing their best to make sure that I died on the lunar surface. I tried to scramble to my feet anyhow, but they shoved me right back down again. I struggled against them, wondering how I'd managed to end up in yet another life-or-death situation, wishing that I had never left the moon base, wanting desperately to be safely back inside. And then, suddenly, I was. There was a flash and a strange sensation of being pulled through something, and then I was standing inside the airlock without my spacesuit, as safe as could be. Only when I looked through the airlock window, I could see that everyone else was still out on the surface, including someone lying on their stomach, who I realized was actually me. I had transmitted myself via thought again, only this time I'd done it without Zan's help, and I hadn't projected to someone like Riley. I had simply projected myself, or my mind, to exactly where I wanted to be, the safety of the airlock. In the heat and desperation of the moment, I had managed to pull off the trick of traveling via thought once again. Unfortunately, my body was still dying back out on the lunar surface, so I didn't have time to savor the moment, or even focus on how I'd done it. I thought myself back into my own body, which was far easier to do. Once I stopped trying so hard to think myself away, it was as though my mind homed right back in on where it was supposed to be. 1 second I was in the airlock, and the next I was back in my spacesuit, 2 minutes from death. I fought to survive. I heaved myself up to my knees. My attacker tried to shove me back down again, but adrenaline was now surging through me. I braced against their attack and then swiveled toward MBA. The airlock door was probably 45 seconds away, and it would take another minute to repressurize inside, and then I would have 15 seconds to unlock my helmet. Only my attacker was still between me and the airlock. Since I was down on my knees, they loomed over me. and since their reflected visor was down, I couldn't see their face. I had no idea who they were or what they were thinking. It was like facing a robot rather than a human being. In the warped mirror of their visor, I saw myself kneeling helplessly before them. But there was other movement as well. Behind me, Violet was struggling to her feet, probably having an adrenaline surge of her own. I couldn't quite make out what Violet was doing, but she seemed to be reaching for my oxygen hose. My attacker turned slightly, noticing Violet, and then they lunged for her as well. "No!" I screamed. Without my radio connection, I was the only one who heard it. My voice echoed inside my helmet. I reached for my attacker, but they easily brushed past me, heading for Violet. "Warning," the computer said. 90 seconds left. Violet tried to run from our attacker, making the mistake of turning her back on the enemy. Now her fragile network of life-sustaining hoses and other equipment was exposed. The attacker grabbed her oxygen hose and tugged on it. It didn't come free, but I figured another good yank would do the trick. And if Violet lost her oxygen supply, she probably wouldn't have the ability or the mental calm to make it to safety. My own oxygen was going fast, but I wasn't about to let someone take down my sister, too. I staggered to my feet, determined to defend Violet to my last breath. Only before I could attack, someone else did it for me. Another Mooney suddenly raced into view and body slammed Violet's attacker. Once again, due to the reflective visor, I had no idea who our savior was. Both Moonies went flying due to the impact. They sailed 10 feet and then tumbled across the lunar surface, plowing through the moon dust. Violet's oxygen hose was still attached. She was safe. "Warning," my suit computer said. 60 seconds left. I turned back toward the airlock, wondering how long I could hold my own breath, and worried that if I saved myself, I would be leaving my savior at the mercy of the killer. Something tugged at the back of my suit, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I feared that a second killer had attacked. But then I realized I could no longer see Violet, and it must be her behind me. There was a metallic click, followed by a sudden whoosh of air. "Crisis averted," the computerized voice announced. "Your oxygen hose has been properly reconnected. Please exercise caution. Your oxygen level is now only at 42%. The heads-up display changed. My oxygen level was revealed to be decent, and I was shown a nice little smiley face emoji as well, to indicate I was no longer about to die. Well, Violet might have only been 6, but she had obviously been paying attention to the safety checks. She just saved my life. "Thanks, little sister," I said, forgetting that she couldn't hear me because my radio was still unplugged. I didn't have time for her to fix that, though, because whoever had saved me was now still fighting whoever had tried to kill me. The problem was, now I wasn't sure who was who. I'd lost track of which was my attacker and which was the one who'd come to my rescue, and in their spacesuits they appeared to be exactly the same. The two of them were wrestling on the lunar surface and so covered with moon dust that they looked like they'd been dipped in batter. They were rolling over each other and pounding on each other. By now, the other Moonies had realized what was going on. They were coming our way, moving as fast as they could, which wasn't fast enough. I bounded toward the fighting Moonies. And then Zan suddenly flickered into view. She appeared in her usual human form, although since she didn't need a spacesuit, she was simply standing on the lunar surface, which looked almost as odd as her jellyfish form would have been. There was a look of shock and astonishment on her face. She seemed horrified that we humans were trying to kill one another yet again. "Dashiell," she cried, "are you all right?" "Yes." "And Violet too?" "Yes." "Is there anything I can do?" "Keep an eye on Violet. Make sure she's doing okay." "All right." Zan vanished from my sight, perhaps worried that she would be a distraction otherwise. Ahead of me, the other two Moonies were still fighting each other. One of them seemed to have gotten the upper hand, however, and was now sitting on the chest of the other, who was laid out, flat on the ground. The one on top grabbed a large moon rock and raised it above their head, ready to smash it down on the other's glass faceplate. I figured that was probably my attacker, because anyone willing to smash the faceplate of another Moonie was a pretty bad person. I dove at them, driving my shoulder into the attacker, knocking them to the lunar surface. I lost my balance and went down with them, plowing back into the moon dust. Unfortunately, they didn't let go of the rock. Instead, they thumped me on the helmet with it. "Warning," my suit computer said. "A blow to the structural integrity of your helmet has been detected." The attacker thumped me again. "Warning," my suit computer repeated. "A blow to the structural integrity." "I know!" I shouted. "Shut up! I get it!" There was another thump on the helmet, but this one wasn't as hard and as though the attacker had been interrupted in the middle of it. I struggled up to my hands and knees to find a lot more Moonies now around us. In fact, it appeared that almost everyone from MBA had joined the party now. 3 were restraining the Moonies who'd been fighting, while others were still racing over to help intervene. My attacker, who still had the rock in their hands, was now being pinned down to the lunar surface by 2 Moonies. Again, I had no idea who anyone was due to the visors, but given that one of the Moonies who'd come to the rescue was several inches taller than everybody else, I figured this was Dr. Balnikov. He looked at me in a way that, even with our faces hidden from view, seemed to indicate that he was talking to me. I did my best to convey that I couldn't hear anything and pointed to the back of my suit, signaling that my radio was shot. Another Moonie slipped around behind me. A few seconds later, there was a crackle as my radio came back on. I could immediately hear Violet talking to Zan on channel 17. "That was scary," my sister was saying. "Like really scary." "It's over now," I assured her. "We're safe." And then I flipped to channel 1, which was the basic channel for communication, and was instantly overwhelmed by a flood of voices, everyone talking at once. "Be quiet!" Dr. Balnikov roared. He sounded like he might start knocking people around if they didn't listen. Everyone immediately fell silent. "That's better," Dr. Balnikov said, and then pointed to me. "Who are you?" "The shield." There were a few hushed gasps over the radio. People seemed surprised that I was the one that had been attacked. "Are you all right?" Dr. Balnikov asked me. "Yes." "Good." Dr. Balnikov shifted his attention to the person who had saved me. "And who are you?" "Cesar Marquez." This time I gasped a little. Cesar had never struck me as the type who'd go out of his way to hand somebody a napkin, let alone risk his life for them. One of the other Moonies burst from the crowd and threw their arms around Cesar protectively. "Are you all right?" she asked. It was Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez. "Sure, Mom, I'm fine." Dr. Balnikov now turned his attention to my attacker. "And who are you?" he demanded. There was no answer. The Moonie simply lay on the ground underneath Dr. Balnikov. They didn't speak. They didn't move. Dr. Balnikov might as well have been talking to a department store mannequin. "Who are you?" Dr. Balnikov demanded once again. The Moonie didn't respond. Dr. Balnikov grunted angrily and then yanked the Moonie to their feet. He did it with such ease, it appeared that the Moonie weighed nothing at all. Dr. Balnikov planted the Moonie on the ground so hard that their boots sank several inches into the moon dust. Then he reached around the back of their helmet and flipped a switch. My attacker's mirrored visor sprang up, revealing their identity. Lily Jober.